Hello, good morning. So we're here this morning just outside the town of Chippenham on a stretch of road called Rowden Hill, or Rowden Hill. Chippenham is just over the top of the hill there, just half a mile or so is the Chippenham town centre. And we've come here this morning because on the late night of 16th of April 1960, this was the site of a car crash which the following day would claim the life of Eddie Cochran. And to mark the spot here on Rowden Hill is this memorial to Eddie Cochran here. It says Eddie Cochran, cherished memories 1938 to 1960. So this is a newer memorial, was placed here a few years ago. A lot of fans had contributed to have this erected here. Eddie Cochran died on Sunday, April the 17th, 1960 at the age of 21. It was said he was born in Oklahoma City on 3rd of October 1938, but it was actually Albert Lea, Minnesota where Eddie Cochran was born. His family were from Oklahoma originally, but had moved up to Minnesota by the time Eddie Cochran was born. So this, one more look, this is the Eddie Cochran Memorial. This is only number 1 hit there, 3 steps to heaven, and there's the lyrics. You find the girl you love. Step 2, she falls in love with you. Step 3, you kiss and hold her tightly. Yeah, that sure seems like heaven to me. It says heavenly music filled the air that very tragic day. Something seemed to be missing though, so I heard the creator say, we need a master guitarist and singer. I know of but one alone. His name is Eddie Cochran. I think I'll call him home. So we'll come back here in a moment after our little visit to Bristol. So there's a lot of noise around this morning, but I'll try my best. Monday 11th of April 1960, Eddie Cochran, Gene Vincent and Sharon Sheeley checked into this hotel here, the Bristol Royal it was called then. It's the Marriott now, but it was just the Bristol Royal, ahead of the week-long engagement at the Hippodrome. It was perfectly placed for the Bristol Hippodrome. I'll show you, we'll walk around there now to show you how close it was to the hotel. There's nothing in there now to signify Eddie Cochran, Gene Vincent, Sharon Sheeley stayed here. You can't stay in the rooms. The rooms no longer exist as they once did. It's only this facade, the 4 outside walls actually that are original, and the Palm Court Lounge inside. All the rooms were destroyed when this was due a major refurbishment, but stood empty for many years, and through rain damage and such, all the inside rooms apart from the Palm Court Lounge were destroyed. So you wouldn't really stay in Eddie Cochran's room because it's not there. Okay, we'll walk round. Eddie Cochran and Gene Vincent have been acquainted for around 3 years by now. They toured together in the spring of 1957. Later that year, around September time, they'd also toured Australia with Little Richard. Towards the end of 57, Eddie Cochran was on a package tour, Irving Fell's biggest stars of 1957, with amongst others the Everly Brothers. So of course Eddie Cochran became big friends with the Everly Brothers, and especially Phil Everly, who introduced him to Sharon Sheeley at the end of 1957 at a Christmas package in New York. Sharon Sheeley became the youngest female songwriter to have a #1 hit in America when in March '58 Ricky Nelson recorded her song Poor Little Fool. Sharon Sheeley, she gave Eddie Cochran the song Love Again, which was not as commercially viable as Poor Little Fool, and it was the B-side of Eddie Cochran's Summertime Blues, which became his biggest hit in America. And as the year progressed, Eddie Cochran and Sharon Sheeley got more acquainted until by the end of the year they were an item. In March '58, Eddie Cochran and Gene Vincent were reacquainted at Capitol Records Studios in Los Angeles when Gene Vincent was recording new songs and Eddie Cochran provided backing vocals. Songs like Get It, Lovely Loretta, Now Is the Hour, and a few others. Eddie Cochran provided bass vocal backing for it. So we come round to the Hippodrome. There's the hotel there. So Eddie Cochran and Gene Vincent only had to walk down the road here. And the Hippodrome, bang on time, is parked right behind a lorry that's just pulled up. Typical. Yeah, so when Gene Vincent came over the UK in December '59, Jack Good, the TV producer who had produced Oh Boy, brought over, he wanted an American, what he felt was the authentic rock and rollers, the American artists. Gene Vincent was perhaps cheap enough. Gene Vincent hadn't had a hit in Britain since '56, of course his classic Bebop-A-Lula. He also charted with Blue Jean Bop, but hadn't had a hit since '56 in the UK. So he came over to make an appearance on Jack Good's new Boy Meets Girls TV show. While he was here, impresario Larry Parnes, who was the manager of all the homegrown British talent, Marty Wilde, Vince Eager, Tommy Steele, Billy Fury. He set up a 12-date tour of mainly Granada theatres, mainly in the southern part of England. But that was so successful that they wanted to start another tour, and Foster's agency said they could get Eddie Cochran over as well to join the tour, and that's what happened. Eddie Cochran had a recording session on January 8th, 1960. Where he recorded Three Steps to Heaven, Cherished Memories and Cut Across Shorty. Flew over to the UK on the 10th of January. Jack Good had arranged for a few appearances on the Boy Meets Girl show for Eddie as well as Gene. And the first date then was the 24th of January 1960 at the Ipswich Gaumont. There followed several one-night stands around the country. The tour was so successful that several week-long engagements were then added to the tour right at the end of February, taking in places like Leeds and Glasgow, Liverpool. On the Saturday 16th of April, of course, that was the last date here at the Bristol Hippodrome. Eddie Cochran had prior commitments, recording session booked with his label Liberty Records down there in California. But he was due to fly back to Britain within 10 days or so to start another series, another leg of the tour with Gene Vincent. Gene Vincent, in the interim, rather than going back to America, was set up with a week-long engagement in Paris by Larry Parnes. The show finished here on the Saturday night, 16th of April. They'd already checked out of the hotel. They didn't go back to the hotel. They just came out of the side door, round the side there. So George Martin driving the taxi picked Eddie Cochran, Gene Vincent, Sharon Sheeley, and Eddie and Gene's road manager for the week, Patrick Tompkins. Picked them up outside the stage door here and headed out initially on the A4 towards London. Bath is back on that way on the A4. This A4 was the main route to London from Bristol in the days before the M4 was built, the M4 motorway of course. Now Patrick Tompkins, although the car was travelling this direction from Bath, Patrick Tompkins tells of a shortcut that the driver George Martin had taken because Bath late Saturday night was apparently notoriously busy at the traffic, and George Martin had decided to take a shortcut. Now I've looked at the map and there's another road, an A420, which more or less runs parallel from Bristol to Chippenham, but actually bypasses Bath, and actually on paper does look a quicker route. And that could be corroborated because Patrick Tompkins, the road manager, does recall coming under a viaduct. Now there's a bridge just down round the bend down there, but of course that is just a single bridge. It's not on a viaduct. Now the viaduct is up in the town centre of Chippenham, just at the north end of the town centre, where the A420 does come into Chippenham town centre, and there is the viaduct there. But Patrick Tompkins explained, remembers coming through under the viaduct down the road, and he said the road splits into two with a bridge on the left and the road on the right, and George Martin saw the sign for A4, took the right hand turn by mistake. So if that was the case, they actually came down the road here originally back towards Bath before realising he was going the wrong way, which means he turned round somewhere down there in that direction, trying to make up for lost time. Came back this way at speed, but the car came round the bend there at speed, hit that curb there, spun up the road here, and the back end of the car hit a lamppost just at the point here where the memorial now is. Eddie Cochran threw himself across Sharon Sheeley to protect her, but unfortunately he was thrown to the roof, into the roof of the car, and received severe head injuries. When the ambulance arrived here just after midnight, in the early hours of Sunday of April 17th, 1960, they took the injured initially to Chippenham Cottage Hospital, it says. Now I've had a look, and the Chippenham Cottage Hospital actually closed as a cottage hospital. I can't remember now. It was either the 1920s or 1930s, but it wasn't actually, the building wasn't actually demolished until the 70s, I believe. So I'm not sure if the police officer was referring to that old hospital or the Chippenham Community Hospital, which is actually just around the bend there at the top of the hill. There's a hospital which was there in 1960. But anyway, he wasn't there too long before he was transferred to St Martin's Hospital in Bath. So we're going to head over there. We're going to head over there in a moment. When Eddie Cochran was taken to the hospital, of course all his belongings were scattered all over the road here on Rowden Hill, and when they were taken to the police station, and there was a young police officer there called Dave Harmon, who was charged with looking after Eddie's Gretsch 6120 classic orange guitar, of course. And Dave Harmon in the late 60s would become Dave D and have and would have many top tens in Britain with his group Dave D, Dozy, Biggie, Mick and Touch. Just come up the road a bit from Rowden Hill, which is down there, speaking to a lovely couple of ladies, and they said that just up here there's a newer estate here, and this little street is called Cochran Avenue. There's St Martin's Hospital. I'm not sure if this would have been the entrance originally to the casualty department. There is a photo of Billy Fury, Vince Eager, Eddie Cochran and Gene Vincent's tour manager Norm Riley standing outside the entrance, so I'm not sure if that was it. Oh, and Larry Barnes, of course, was Billy Fury's manager and Vince Eager's manager. This is where the ambulance brought Eddie Cochran at early hours of the morning on 17th of April. Eddie Cochran died here at 4:10 in the afternoon. It used to be an old Victorian, what do you call it, workhouse, poorhouse. And this church, of course, has been here since those earliest times, and when the residents, shall we say, of the workhouse, of the poorhouse, when they died, they were all buried in this ground here, so they're all still buried here actually, round about this area. But the only memorial that stands in these grounds, although he's not buried here, is for Eddie Cochran when he was brought here early hours of 17th of April. Singer Eddie Cochran, aged 21, was killed as a result of a taxi crash at Chippenham, Wiltshire, after leaving the Bristol Hippodrome. He was returning to America to headline on the Ed Sullivan TV show. Eddie left behind a number of classic recordings on various labels. I'm not sure about the... Well, I don't doubt the knowledge of the people who put this here, but I've never actually read that he was going back to star on the Ed Sullivan TV show. He certainly had a recording date at Liberty Records in California with producer Snuff Garrett, and that's what he was going back for as well, to see his family. Of course, he missed his parents a lot while he was over here in Britain. But I've never actually read that he was going to be on the Ed Sullivan show. Country music star 1953 to 1956, so that was when he first started. Country music star, he met Hank Cochran in early 55. He was an acquaintance of Eddie Cochran's friend Chuck Foreman. They were signed to the Echo label. They released 2 singles on the Echo label as the Cochran Brothers, although not a particularly common name, of course. They were not related, but as was the popularity with country brothers, such as Louvin brothers, Delmore brothers, Wilburn brothers. There was plenty of them at the time. They tried their luck as the Cochran Brothers, released 2 singles on the Echo label, but didn't get too far. And it says Hollywood film star there, 56, 57, 59. Through his American production company, he met Simon Waronker, who owned Liberty Records, and also had connections with the movie industry, and they were looking for artists to appear in a film called The Girl Can't Help It, and Eddie Cochran was signed up for that. And on the back of him recording 20 Flight Rock for the movie, Simon Waronker signed him to the Liberty label. So it says there, American rock and roll star, of course, 1956 to 1960. Eddie Cochran, although only aged 21, he's 4 absolute classic songs to his name there. 20 Flight Rock was Summertime Blues, he wrote with his manager Jerry Capehart. That was top 10 in America and number 18 in the UK. That was followed by classic number 3 then, Come On Everybody. That was top 10 in Britain, his first top 10, number 6. And then of course Something Else, which was written by Sharon Sheeley and Eddie Cochran's brother Bob. There's also this sundial here. How much of the sun it actually gets shining on it, I don't know, but this was also placed here, and it says, "This sundial in memory of singer Eddie Cochran was presented to St Martin's Hospital by his many fans from Bristol." And it just reiterates his date of birth and 1960, when he died aged 21.